First of all, I'm going to be building the cockpit. That's parts 1 to 6 on the instruction sheet. What I'd like to do is to remove all the pieces of the sprues. Some of them will need to be painted and detailed separately before fitting. Then I can build that as a separate unit and then get on and then put the two halves together. Now that I've taken the cockpit parts off the sprue, what I want to do is to give them a coat of the black. It does say Humbrol 33, which is plain black. What I'll be doing is actually using the black, just plain black from Vallejo. Before I close the cockpit up, I will be dry brushing on with some lighter tones, some metallic tones, just to try to break that up, otherwise it will just be a bit too black. It's moving on with the Vampire. I've built the cockpit now, done some dry brushing, so everything got a coat of black, and then went round with a little bit of Mr. Colour number 8 metallic silver on a brush. It's a brush that I use just for metallic dry brushing, so it's very worn. This would have been steel with black paint put over. That would have got chipped off as people were climbing in and out. So I do want to have that worn look. Got to remember that this Vampire was one of the first jets, and it really wasn't that long after things like Hurricanes and Spitfires had been built. Next, I painted the pilots. Because this is going to be in flight, normally I don't like painting figures, so I must admit I do prefer to have planes with the cockpit open, detailing up the cockpits, but I do want to do this one in flight, and in flight you do need to have some pilots in there, so I've painted them. I do need to be wary of, when painting a bare metal finish, any imperfections will show up, so I'm going to need to make sure that once I build it, all tabs are taken off, it fits together as flush as possible. Then I'm going to have to go through filling those gaps, sanding, filling, sanding, to get it as absolutely flush as possible, then prime it, because then I'll be going over with a glossy black that will then give a good base for the metallic finish to go on top, so it should be quite a quick build to get it together. The main part of this build isn't going to be the building, it's actually going to be the filling, the sanding, the filing off, to make sure that plastic is absolutely perfect, so when the primer goes on and that black undercoat goes on, it will make sure that you're going to get a perfect finish once that metallic finally goes on at the end. I've just carefully gone through, put that together with some of the Tamiya Extra Thin, just using a little bit of tape in places just to hold it together, although I've got to say it does fit really well. Before doing this I did make sure that I removed the tabs and then sanded them down to make sure they were flush, and done some test fitting, so I knew that it was going to come together nicely. But I've got to say it is in perfect alignment, and that really shouldn't need that much, perhaps just a little sand just to bring it together, but that Tamiya Extra Thin is actually welding that plastic together, and I think that should actually give a really nice finish to that one. I've just encountered quite a big, well actually small, but very annoying problem when just putting together the sponsons. The pylons that come out for the tailplane, I glued all along there, got that fine, got as far as the two parts of the rudder coming together, and realised that right in the middle, just where these come together, there's two ejection pins, two marks there. But just make sure that it's very easy to make sure that you try to get the little tabs off, not just the tabs sticking out, but make sure they're flush. But there's just two on the inside, two ejection pins, which, to be honest, if I just rub with a filing stick there, has removed that one, and then just take that one off, means that we now have an absolutely perfect flush fit there. So I'm just getting that first part to bite first. That's going to give me the pivot point, and then I can work my way down. We're now at the stage where all the plastic's stuck on. It is now just going to be a case of painting it, and it wasn't without problems. I had to run some filler along those booms just to give those nice and smooth contours to it along the top and the bottom, as well as the bottom of the fuselage. The real issue that I had was when I come to sandwich the wings together, the joins that go in here seem to be a bit too thick for the placement of where the boom roots go in, and it just seemed to lift the wings apart. And quite a bit of filler was actually needed just under the intakes, just to try to get rid of a nasty step going on. But so far it looks a bit bad at the moment with filler in different places, but I have re-scribed it out, so once it actually gets the primer on there, it should all start coming together. So far I put on the canopy, I've fixed it on with PVA glue, and then after masking up, of course, as well, I gave it a coat of black. The reason for that is I'm going to be putting on a grey primer first of all, but I want to put some black down on there, so if you're looking through and you can see the inside of the frame, that it should actually look like it's black on the inside of the canopy. So that's on there. Next is going to be the primer, then I'm going to be putting on a black gloss coat, and then finally going to be the bare metal finish. For the prime, I'm actually going to be using Mr. Surfacer 1200. It is a filler and a primer in one, and the reason I'm going for this is because I do want to have a really smooth glossy finish on there, and this gives a really smooth base. Once it goes down, it does feel really silky smooth, so any little imperfections, any little scratches left over by sanding sticks, it should cover all of that. And if I do go over that and I do see any major problems, then I can always go back and readdress those areas before putting the black gloss on there for the undercoat. The Mr. Surfacer 1200 and the Mr. Colour levelling thinner has worked really well, and I've got a really nice smooth finish on here. There was a few little bits that I noticed where I just used a sanding sponge just to try to just cover up a few seam lines, and just then wanted to re-scribe a few little areas, especially where some of the filler had already gone into it and just wasn't getting the panel lines. I had an idea, which I'm trying, is before I put down the black, I've just masked up a couple of panels, as well as using some mask oil to just cover up a few little hatches. Not all of them, but the idea being is that when I put down the gloss black, what will hopefully happen is then I will take off the masking and then put on the bare metal finish, and hopefully that should mean that the panels and the areas that have been masked up won't have the gloss black undercoat, and therefore being more dull and have a more worn looking and possibly look like a replacement panel, as opposed to the more shinier newer parts. For the black, I was going to use the Tamiya X1, but decided I'm going to go for MRP black. This isn't really a gloss, but I'm not going to be going for a complete high-speed metal finish. If it doesn't come out quite as smooth as what I want, I can just go over with a little bit of Mr. T.11 thinner. That will reactivate that and should give a smooth finish, and it will be black, but it will be more of a satin sheen, not a complete mirror finish, and I think that will work well because this isn't a shiny plane, it is just one which is actually in metallic. So going to pop some of this on and then give that a bit of time to dry, and then we can get that final metal coat on. And that's given me quite a smooth surface on that. It's not a real deep gloss, but it has got a sheen to it, a certain satin feel, and that's fine because I'm not going for the real highly polished, high-speed aluminium, but I do want that sort of a shine to it. But what I have done is remove the mask that I put over before applying the black. So that's come off, so I've got some areas which are still going to go onto the Mr. Surfacer, the grey primer. So what I'm hoping is that will mean that when the aluminium's on there, that's going to make those bits a bit more dull and a bit more worn looking. The reason I went for the MRP as well is because it goes on quite thin, and I was worried that with a layer of Mr. Surfacer, a layer of Tamiya paint, and then the polished aluminium on top, that could be 3 layers, it could really start losing some of that finer detail we want to put in a panel line wash. So that's really a thin coat of that on there. I'm pleased with how the Extreme Metals AK Interactive polished aluminium has gone down, and also pleased with how the masking of the black primer coat has actually worked. So most of it had the MRP black over it, but there was a few patches where I put the masking on there just so the Mr. Surfacer 1200 was the base primer, and those have come out quite well. In fact, in some lights you cannot see the difference, and then when you flip it around another direction, then it actually looks like there's not been hardly any paint on there at all. So it is a bit of a trick of the eye sort of thing, and it's just going to draw your attention to it. The next thing is to get the decals on there. However, I am worried with these large decals, there could be some sort of silvering on there. So before I do that, I'm going to give it a quick coat of Pledge multi-surface floor polish. That will just create a layer on there. Now my clear coat's gone on and it's dried. It's actually not gone on too thickly. There's not too much of a difference visually, which is actually quite good because I didn't want to add too much shine or take too much shine away. Those panels which had the different primer underneath are also standing out. Not too much, but just enough so they do catch the eye now and again. I've now got 83 decals to go on from some very large ones which have got to go around some big contours, and also some very small ones as well. These do go on in layers, so I've realised don't start at the very beginning. I have to start with the larger ones first of all, get those red-orange stripes down, and once those have contoured on, come back and then start putting the round ones on. Now because this is an Airfix kit, I've decided I'm going to use Humbrol Decal Fix. I've had it in the box for quite a while. It kind of has a yellowishness to it, I'm not too sure, but hopefully it'll be fine. Unlike the micro satin, micro sol that I normally use, I decided I'm going to use this one. It's an all-in-one solution. I've got it in the box, and perhaps because I have got some very large decals to go around some contours as well, maybe the Humbrol solution will work quite well with Airfix, with it all being part of the Hornby empire. I'm going to pop some in a little tray that I've got here, and then the idea is that you soak it in the Decal Fix, you apply some Decal Fix onto the area that is going on. It needs to bed down a little bit more, you can apply a bit more Decal Fix on there. It's meant to be a microset and microsol all in one solution. So let's start with the large ones first of all. Now what I have immediately noticed as I was cutting it out is there's a little notch taken out with a little part of the decal in there, and that will be going whereabouts the fuel tanks are on the pylon under the wing. So I'm going to have to remove that before that wraps round. But the issue that I've also found is that the pylons might not actually line up completely with where that is. So the decaling did not go to plan at all. As soon as I went in the Humbrol Decal Fix, I don't know if it was the Decal Fix's problem or the decal's problem, they started to shatter. Now at first I thought I was doing one of the large ones, it's because it had curled up and I just thought perhaps the curling. So the next one I put in, made sure I kept it flat, but they were just cracking, crazing all over the place. I've still got bits all over my cutting mat. And I thought perhaps if I could do it on stages, get some Decal Fix on them, or the microset and microsol, try and soften them up, curve them round, but it was just an absolute mess. So in the end, taking the decision, I took them off and then had to respray it again with some more extreme metal, aka interactive polished aluminium, and then give it another go over, just because quite a lot of the paint had started to wear off. Where I was trying to take it off, there's still a few sort of marks on there where the decals were, but I've resealed it again with some pledge, with some clear there, and that should now mean that I'm going to have to go the way that I thought I was going to have to go, which is to mask it up and repaint it. I haven't got any orange, and it is a neon type orange, but I have got some Vallejo yellow and red, and if you know, orange is made up from yellow from red. There's only a few drops of red there, it's mainly yellow, but it's actually quite a similar orange, hasn't quite got that luminous fluorescence to it. However, I did find it a little bit much anyway. I don't think in scale, that scale you really would have quite that glow. So I'm hoping that's actually quite a similar match to that. So get some masking on there and see if I can actually paint that on by hand and then get the decals on top. What I will do though is when I am decaling it, I won't use the Humbrol Decal Fix. I'll actually just use some warm water with a bit of microset or microsol, and that way I'll see whether it was actually the decals that are the problem or the Decal Fix was just too strong for it. Masking it is going well, pleased with how it's going. It's taking a lot longer than what I thought it was going to be taking. Managed to get the stripes on there and the stripes going down the back and also on the booms. Not too sure if they're completely accurate, but this green tape that I've got is thin. It's probably about a 3mm width, and I've done some strips down there, and hopefully that is actually about the width of the silver between the red stripes. So hopefully that should be fine. Going onto the towel, I've been doing a lot of masking because I really don't want to go and ruin all of this by then having some overspray. I'm just hoping that I've detacked the tape enough so that when I do take the masking off, there's not going to be just pulling up and going back to primer, because that would be very frustrating considering how well this kit was going when I started. And it wasn't until I put the decals on that it all just started to go to pieces on me, literally. So, a final bit that I need to do is to just mask the stripes on the front of the nose and then just mask up the tail area just to make sure that I don't get any overspray. And then once that's fine, it's going to be a case of blasting on my little mix up of the orange and take the masking off and hopefully get those stripes back to where else I should have been many days ago. Finally, I think I've managed to get this remasked up. I have gone completely overboard on masking, but I really want to avoid any overspray on this. This is probably made up from about 30 drops of yellow and about 10 drops of the red. So I've painted on my mix of yellow and red to make an orange colour. Got to admit, now it's dried, it's not looking as vibrant as what it was. Very carefully, I'm going to now try to remove some of the masking and see what we've got there. Wish me luck. I've unmasked it, and to be honest, I'm pretty pleased with the results. There's been a little bit of bleed through under, which is to be expected with this much masking, and I've just used a cotton bud with a little bit of airbrush cleaner and also a cocktail stick, which I've slightly chiselled the end just for some of those bits. It's been a couple of hours since I put the paint on there, so it hadn't properly cured, and there are a few little areas that will need a little bit of touching up. It's not as bright and vibrant as what it probably would have been, but actually for the scale effect, I think if it had have gone with that orange or had that luminous colour, it probably wouldn't have worked quite so well. So I'm actually happy with the rescue. It's not perfect, there's still a few bits there, but I think just with a little bit of the paint on a brush I can just touch in a few little areas, and considering I've got some of the panels on here had a different primer underneath to show where things hopefully had been changed in or out, that will actually go with the effect anyway of it not being, it'll be clean, not really dirty and weathered, but it will look like a used vehicle, and that's really what I'm looking for. But so far I'm pretty pleased with how this is coming out, considering the amount of hassle that I've had doing it. Now that I've actually taken the mask off, got the red on, been happy with it, done a few little bits of touching up, I've then sealed it with yet another, I think this is going to be the third, I think that's the third coat of pledge that's actually gone onto here. What I'm actually doing is I'm just going to be using the old tried and tested method of what I normally would do, which is to use some warm water and some microset to help get it down, and then once it's on some microsol. What I was trying to do before was to use the Humbrol decal fix, and I was finding it was cracking, but the first thing I've done is to actually just put the one of the decals into the water just to see how that is, to see if that was cracked. And I've actually got to say that is perfectly fine and not a problem. And if I had put that on there, that wood actually can form, I think, around the model. So I don't think it's the problem with the decals. I think the problem is definitely with the decal fix. I think it's overly acidic, and I think what was happening is when I was putting the decals straight into the neat decal fix, as it recommends you do, and also I checked on the Humble video, that was just too strong a solution, and that as soon as it was hitting. But that one, warm water, perfectly fine, like a normal decal. However, it might mean that if you've got a real tough decal that just really needs to conform, and you really cannot get that to sped down, the Humble decal fix might be good for really breaking it down and getting it in, but not for when you're actually putting the decals on. So, little experiment over. I'm going to crack on and get on as many as I can. I've now applied the wash and taken the wash off. I used the Flooring Models wash. I used the black one. It is quite stark, but I didn't want it to make sure it stand out. It was just a case of painting it on, and then before it dried, using kitchen paper to wipe it off again. Use that quite moist. If you want a weathered look, use it quite dry. The wetter you make the kitchen roll, the more you're going to dilute it and wash it off. So I used it quite damp. Didn't want to take it all off because otherwise you're not going to really get a huge amount of the effect, and I did want to leave it a bit weathered. When I first started the build, it was going to be a nice clean shiny model, but because I had to mask up and paint on the reddy orangey colour myself, and that didn't come out absolutely perfectly. It's good enough, I think, for a rescue job, but not as perfect as what I would have wanted. Therefore it looks like there's a few chips and paint markings on there. Things have got worn, so because of that I kept the wash on a little bit thicker than what I would have wanted to do, but it has really got into the panel lines. On the bottom as well, there's some riveting detail around the hatches, bottom of the wing that has really started to pop out, which I didn't really notice at all. I'm now just going to be making a little stand. The idea is it's going to be on a little plinth, and it's going to look like it's going to be in an upward climb, and that will enable the bottom detail to be seen as well, and hopefully maybe have a bit of an angle so it's looked like it's actually in flight. Not as shiny, didn't turn out quite how I wanted. I did want to do a much more cleaner looking bird. It's a bit more weathered than I wanted, but to be honest it was either that or chuck it in the bin. So for a rescue job, I'm actually quite pleased. Once I'd finally managed to get that paint down that I was happy with, it was a case of putting the decals on, a lot of decals, and then I gave it a final wash to bring out the panel lines, left it quite clean. However, because there has been some damage to the paintwork from the masking and the decals, taking the decals off, remasking it, doing it all again, and then all those layers, there seems to be a few little scrapes and things that happened across, and I was going to try to touch them up again, and then it would have been however many layers of paint and sealer would have been going on there. So I thought I'm going to leave them on because some of them seem to be more on the front edges where there could be potential scrapes of bird strikes or anything like that going on. So I thought I'll leave them on there, put the weathering wash on there, took it off so it's just really left it in the panel lines. Made a nice little display to show it in flight. I wanted to really try to have an air of it in motion where it's actually pulling up and banking over at the same time. And however, I am pleased with the overall look of it. When I primed, I did the Mr. Surfacer 1200 and then primed it with the gloss black, but I actually masked up some of the panels so they didn't have the gloss black primer before the aluminium went down. And I've got to say, that has actually worked well. Every now and again I look at this and I think if I've lost it, but it's in certain lights that you'll see it, and then other lights it doesn't stand out, so it does attract the eye, which is exactly what I wanted to do. The bottom is quite detailed, there's some good panel lines and everything all in the bottom, and I wanted to make sure by putting it on a stand like this it can be looked at from all angles, and so those details on the bottom really do shine through. This has been a great kit. So that's Airfix's 172nd De Havilland Vampire T.11/J28-C
for a cheap kit, it was great. What really let it down for me was the decals going down, but in hindsight it was actually the Humbrol decal fix that broke up the decals, not the decals themselves. When I tried it with just water, they were fine. I think the decal fix would have been good for bedding them down, not for softening them up in the first place, which just made them crack. However, having to make up my own orangey, reddy orange colour, it might not have been quite as vibrant as the orange of the decals. However, I think it actually come across quite well, and it gives it that scale effect. I think the bright orange, vibrant, fluorescent colour might have been a bit overkill. And I've got to say, when this is up on the shelf, so often my eye does get drawn to this, and I spot other details on there, even though I'm sat a couple of foot away from it. It is one of those ones where it really does draw the eye to it, and you spot those extra little lines, those extra little details in there. And I think just the way that it looks like it is pulling up, banking to the side, really it does set it off. So for a couple of quid, I would definitely recommend this kit. Whether you want to go down the decal route or decide to mask it up is up to you, but from the kit's point of view, it was a really good build, fun build, went together really nicely, not too much filler was needed, and definitely I would recommend this one. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe to see what I'm reviewing and building next. If you have any comments of what you'd like to see me do, or maybe comments on what I could have done with this or how you would have done it differently, please comment below and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. I'm Rob, keep modelling, and I'll speak to you soon.